Hello everybody, so today we are going to be talking about ecosystems, their components, and then kind of how those components interact with one another, and that kind of leads us to food webs. So we'll start with what is an ecosystem. So an ecosystem is a biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. So I really like this graphic here on the bottom left, kind of shows the different steps and the different categories we kind of put these in. So we have a single organism, for this it's a fish, a population, all of the same organisms living in the same area. Then we move on to a community. So we know we have a biological community. So that's what this step is here. So we have multiple different types of organisms all living together in the same place. And then the real big difference between an ecosystem and a community is the physical environment factor. So for this, the water, the sand, the rocks, all of those do have an impact on how different organisms interact with one another. So that's kind of what makes an ecosystem different than some other classifications. So we have some different components. We break them down into two different categories. We have biotic components. We know bio means life, so biotic components are going to be the living components. And then abiotic, meaning non-living, those are our non-living components. So for the living components, we have producers, consumers, and decomposers. Oops. And then for abiotic components, we have things more that are in the physical environment. So air, water, wind, soil, temperature, all those physical factors that do still affect an ecosystem really strongly. So for our biotic components, we have producers. Those are organisms that make their own food using sunlight, majority plants. And then consumers are animals that eat living things as a means of energy. It doesn't matter if it's herbivore or omnivore, you're still eating a living thing, whether it be plant or animal source. So pretty much every other living thing. So animals are all consumers. And then we have decomposers, which break down dead plants and animals, mainly fungi and bacteria that kind of recycle the energy back into our ecosystems. So that kind of leads us to food webs. So a food web contains many food chains. So we know food chains are kind of a simple linear process of how energy goes from one organism to another. Well, a food web takes all of the or several different food chains within an ecosystem and kind of shows how they all overlap, connect, interlock. So you can kind of think of a food chain as being the thread, and you're using that thread and weaving it together to make an overall food web. This is an example of a prairie food web, so something we would see here in Iowa. And what I want you to notice here is that we have this vegetation, for example, over here, and it's pointing to all of the things that will consume it. So pointing to this rabbit, pointing to this deer, butterfly, bugs, that's what's doing the consuming. So this snake is going to eat this bird, this fox is going to eat this pheasant, all of those, for example, and then this bird over here is going to eat this snake. So that's kind of what these food web looks like and kind of what those arrows are meaning. So some ecosystems are more complex, have more complex food webs than others, because some ecosystems have more components than others. So the more components, the more complex the food web gets. And most food webs don't have every single component that is in that ecosystem. Generally, it's focusing on a few big components. But we can see here, oceanic food webs are always really complex because it is such a diverse area and there's so much different levels of life that it gets, a lot of lines, a really complicated web, where some others, like this one on the left, is a little bit more simplified, focusing on a few key factors from an ecosystem. And that is it for today. Thank you very much.